dark secret behind the Harris-twisted massacre of the G family. It was a night like any other, but for the G family, everything was about to change. They had no idea that a monster was coming for them, a man they thought they knew, a man they trusted. Christopher Harris walked into their home, and nothing would ever be the same again. What happened next was pure horror. Blood, screams, lives lost in a way no one could imagine. And one little girl, Tabitha, was left to face the nightmare. Who could do something so evil, and why? This is the chilling story of the bloodbath in Beeson. Stay with us. The truth is darker than you think. Beeson, Illinois, a peaceful little town with a population of only about 200 people, a place where everyone knew each other. It seemed safe, quiet, until one night, the unthinkable happened. The G family lived in this small town. Rick and Ruth, the parents. They had 4 children, Justina, 16, Dylan, 14, Austin, 11, and Tabitha, just 3. They were an ordinary family filled with love and laughter. Rick worked hard, running his own construction business, GC Construction. Ruth, a kind-hearted woman, kept the family together with her warmth and care. Rick also had a daughter from a previous marriage, Nicole. She was an adult now, married to Christopher Harris, a local man. But their marriage, it was anything but ordinary. Nicole and Chris's relationship was a roller coaster. At first, everything seemed fine, but soon cracks started to show. Chris had a volatile temper. He'd snap at the most minor things. Nicole, desperate for stability, tried to fix things. She would forgive him, hoping things would improve, but they never did. Chris wasn't the man Nicole thought she'd married. He wasn't kind or patient. Instead, he was reckless, caught up in drugs, alcohol, and bad decisions. The more they tried to make it work, the worse it got. There were fights, long arguments that never seemed to end. Chris was also no stranger to trouble. His past was filled with bad choices. He had a history of violence. He wasn't known for being a good guy. The warning signs were there. Nicole tried to ignore them, but they couldn't be brushed aside. Everyone around her knew. Something was off. Chris had demons inside him, and it was only a matter of time before those demons took control. The worst part? Chris had begun to spiral out of control. He had already hurt people before, but now he was about to do something far worse. The anger, the frustration, the confusion, it was all building up, and one night it would all explode. The family had no idea that the monster they feared the most was someone they knew, someone they trusted. Nicole's shaky marriage to Chris had dragged her through a dark, never-ending storm, and now that storm was about to destroy everything. But what was the actual spark that set off this horrific chain of events? Christopher Harris walked into the G family's home late September 21, 2009, with darkness in his soul. He wasn't just visiting, no. Tonight he had a plan soaked in rage, fueled by anger, drugs, and twisted thoughts. He thought Justina, the 16-year-old daughter, had been flirting with him. Whether it was true or not, it didn't matter. His mind was clouded by violent thoughts. The bloodshed was coming. The night began with Rick. A father just like any other answers the door. A brief exchange, and then, out of nowhere, Harris swung a heavy breaker bar, crashing it into Rick's skull. The sound of metal meeting flesh echoed through the quiet night. 1 blow, 2, and then more. Rick fell to the ground, his life slipping away with each brutal strike. His head was nothing but a mess of blood and bone. He couldn't even defend himself. Ruth, Rick's wife, heard the commotion and rushed in. She saw her husband lying in a pool of his own blood. Desperate to save him, she ran into the room. But Harris wasn't done. Ruth's face met the breaker bar next. Over and over, Harris struck her head, each blow harder than the last. Ruth's skull caved in. She dropped to the floor, blood pouring from her wounds. The children were next. They had no time to react. Dylan, just 14 years old, was asleep. The first blow caught him off guard. He didn't even have a chance to defend himself. Harris beat him repeatedly, his face smashed beyond recognition. Blood covered the floor, the walls, and the ceiling. It was everywhere. Austin, the 11-year-old, woke up to the sound of chaos. His heart must have pounded in his chest, but there was no escape. He tried to run. He tried to fight, but Harris was relentless. Austin was pushed into the bathroom, where Harris struck him again and again. His head caved in, his body lifeless. But Justina, she was the real target. Harris went straight to her room. She had no idea what was coming. Harris struck her over and over, each blow more vicious than the last. Her entire head was shattered. Blood poured from her head, soaking the bed beneath her. Her brain matter spilled out. Justina died slowly, painfully. She had suffered the worst, and her life was taken with a violence that left nothing behind. And then, the unimaginable, the 3-year-old, Tabitha. Harris had beaten her too, but somehow, against all odds, she survived. She was left for dead, beaten and broken, her tiny body battered beyond belief. Yet Tabitha hung on to life, barely. The morning after the slaughter, a young boy from the neighborhood, excited to show off his new bike, approached the G house. But as he got closer, something stopped him dead in his tracks. Blood. It was smeared across the porch, streaking the door. The door was cracked open. Fear gripped him. He ran straight to Pudge, Rick's stepfather. Pudge rushed to the house, his heart pounding. As soon as he stepped onto the porch, the sight of the blood made him freeze. There was a knife at the bottom of the steps. Pudge and his grandson, Adam, went inside. The moment Adam flicked on the light, his world shattered. Rick was face down, his skull crushed beyond recognition. Blood pooled around him. The sight was too much. Adam couldn't take it. He ran outside, panic flooding his every step. "Call 911, he cried. The police arrived minutes later, but what they found was worse than they could have ever imagined. The house was drenched in blood. The walls, the floor, everything soaked. They found Dylan first. His body was destroyed, beaten over 50 times, his head unrecognizable. Blood covered every inch of the room, on the ceiling, on the walls. Ruth was next. She lay in the bedroom. Half of her head was caved in. It was unimaginable and brutal. Austin was found in the bathroom. Just like Dylan's head had been crushed. The damage was devastating. Harris hadn't cared about age, about innocence. He had struck them all, without hesitation. Then came Justina. Her room was a nightmare. Blood soaked the bed, the walls, and the floor. Her skull had been shattered so violently that pieces of her brain spilled out. She had fought, but it was all in vain. Finally, they found Tabitha, in the closet, surrounded by blood, her head swollen, her body battered. But somehow she was still alive. Barely. The first responders couldn't believe their eyes. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was a massacre. Blood and death everywhere. They had seen crime scenes before, but nothing like this. Not even close. The horror was so overwhelming that it shook them to their core. Who could do this? Who could take an entire family's life with such cold, brutal violence? The small town of Beeson would never be the same again. The pain, the questions, the terror, it would haunt them forever. As the bodies were discovered and the scene unfolded, the investigation would soon lead to one man, and the question was, could Chris Harris really be the killer? The first clue was the lack of forced entry. The door was unlocked. That pointed to someone the family knew. But who could have done such a thing? The authorities couldn't rule out anything just yet. But the more they dug into the family's lives, the more strange things started to surface. The questions piled up. Was it someone from the family? A neighbor? Or had an outsider crept in, unnoticed? One name started to come up. Chris Harris. He was married to Rick's daughter, Nicole, and had been part of their lives for years. But his relationship with the family wasn't perfect. It had been rocky. Multiple breakups, passionate arguments, reconciliations. Some whispered about Chris's anger issues. Others knew of his volatile temper. Was it possible that something snapped inside him? The police had no clear evidence to arrest him, but it didn't take long for them to start looking at him closely. He had a history, and the timing was eerie. The night of the murders, Chris had been acting oddly calm. The night before the killings, he and his brother Jason were out drinking and doing drugs. They had been to bars, even tried to meet up with former girlfriends. Was that a typical night, or did something happen during those late hours that would forever change everything? And then there was the car. A silver pickup truck was seen near the G house the night of the murders. The same kind of truck Chris Harris drove. The same truck that had been spotted by a neighbor just hours before the bodies were discovered. Could this be a coincidence? Or was it a sign that Chris had been there? It was a lead, but it wasn't enough. The police needed more. Then there was the most chilling part. Chris's behavior after the massacre. It was as if nothing had happened. Hours after the murders, he met with an ex-girlfriend, Christy Moore. They spent time together, took selfies, laughed, completely unaffected. The police couldn't make sense of it. How could someone who had just taken the lives of 5 people act so normal? Was he the same man who had left that blood-soaked house? What was going through his mind? As the investigation continued, all the pieces began to fit together. But there was something more, something darker. Could drugs and alcohol have clouded Chris's mind that night? Was this the result of a twisted, drug-fueled rage? Or was there something deeper, something much more sinister? The questions only grew more intense. But what if everything you knew about the case was wrong? What if the key to unraveling this nightmare lay with one unexpected piece of evidence? Before we continue, please take a second to like, share, and subscribe. It will help more people hear stories that matter, stories people are too scared to talk about. Now let's dive back into the mystery that has left everyone asking, who could commit such a horrific act? Chris Harris's defense was simple, but chilling. He claimed innocence. According to him, when he arrived at the G house on the night of the murders, the family was already dead. He didn't do it, he said. In his version, he simply walked in and found a massacre. Overwhelmed and frightened, he acted in self-defense. But the more the police dug, the more questions his story raised. How could he have just walked into a scene like that? Why wasn't he more disturbed? His calm behavior hours after the murders didn't match the story of an innocent man stumbling upon such horror. Then came Jason Harris, Chris's brother, who would play a crucial role in shaping the investigation. Initially, Jason stood by his brother. He gave Chris an alibi, saying they had been together all night. But his story started to crack almost immediately. As investigators questioned him, it became clear that Jason wasn't sticking to the same story. He gave a staggering 13 different versions of the events that night. Each time his version changed slightly, and the inconsistencies piled up. Each story was less reliable than the last. Why couldn't Jason keep his story straight? Was he trying to protect his brother, or was he involved in the murders himself? The contradictions in his testimony added another layer of suspicion to an already bizarre situation. Theories about the motive behind the killings began to swirl, each one darker than the last. Did sexual desire drive Chris? Had he been infatuated with Justina, the 16-year-old daughter of the G family? He had been accused of assault just a week before, but the charges were mysteriously dropped. Could this rejection have been the trigger that led to such an explosion of violence? Some thought the attack was about revenge. Perhaps Chris had blamed the G family for something that had been building inside him for years. Or was there something darker still? Could the murder have been part of a twisted, drug-fueled rage? Alcohol and cocaine had been found in the brothers' system. Did the drugs and alcohol cloud their judgment, turning what may have started as a planned visit into a bloody massacre? The more they investigated, the more these possibilities seemed to collide. The most painful part of this story came from Chris's own family. At first, Nicole, Chris's wife, defended him. She couldn't believe her husband was capable of such a thing. She stood by him, even as the police turned their focus onto him. She made emotional statements, writing in her defense on social media, swearing he was innocent. But as the evidence mounted, Nicole's defense of her husband began to falter. As more clues pointed to Chris, more details about his behavior surfaced, and the truth seemed too big to ignore. She couldn't stand by him forever, not when the pieces of the puzzle came together so clearly. Nicole eventually turned on him, and the heartbreak was palpable. The involvement of drugs that night was another key factor. Chris and Jason had been out drinking, doing cocaine, and trying to find women to keep the party going. The combination of drugs, alcohol, and anger created a toxic mix that likely played a role in what happened next. When the police looked closer, they found out that Chris had been high that night, his mind clouded by substances. But the questions didn't stop there. Was Chris's calm demeanor a sign of guilt, or was he in shock? Why did he act so nonchalant after such a horrific event? In a twist of fate, his cold behavior spoke louder than any words could. All of this created a web of confusion and suspicion. Chris's defense of self-defense, Jason's shifting stories, and the growing evidence about the drugs, the motive, and Chris's bizarre behavior. Each piece added to the overwhelming darkness of the case. What had really happened that night? The case had seemed impossible to crack, but then something incredible happened. The youngest member of the G family, just 3 years old, survived the massacre. Tabitha had been beaten within an inch of her life, her skull fractured, but she defied the odds and clung to life. Her survival became the pivotal moment the police had been waiting for. She had been the only one to witness the brutal slaughter firsthand, and her testimony could have been the key to unlocking the truth. But even as her survival gave hope, Tabitha's recovery would take time. Time that investigators didn't have, and time that could give her the strength to identify the person who had taken everything from her. As the investigation unfolded, Chris Harris's fate became more evident with each passing day. The discovery of bloody handprints and shoe prints outside the G home was the first step in linking him to the crime scene. The prints matched Chris's K-Swiss shoes. Forensic teams also found a breaker bar near the scene, which was later connected to the murder weapon. It seemed like Chris's attempts to cover up his involvement were failing at every turn. He had discarded crucial evidence, throwing away his shoes and the murder weapon, as if he thought the world would forget what had happened in that house. But the evidence only piled up. Even though Chris denied any wrongdoing, detectives continued to close in on him. His alibi was weak, and the physical evidence couldn't lie. The police had something he couldn't escape, the bloody prints that led right to him. But it wasn't just the physical evidence that pointed to Chris. It was his own actions, his chilling lack of remorse, and his unexplainable calmness in the face of the horror he had caused. One of the most important breakthroughs came when a police officer, while finishing up his shift guarding Tabitha in the hospital, took an elevator ride with Chris Harris. As they spoke, the officer noticed something odd. Chris was wearing the same type of shoes as the ones found at the crime scene. It was a small detail, but it was enough to raise suspicions. The officer quickly alerted the detectives, who compared the shoe prints at the scene to the shoes Chris was wearing. The match was undeniable. The investigation moved quickly from there, and just when it seemed like the case might be solved, something more chilling emerged. Chris's brother, Jason Harris, who had initially stood by his brother, came forward with a bombshell confession. Jason admitted that Chris was the one who had murdered the G family in cold blood. Jason described how the night had developed, recounting the argument that escalated into violence. Chris, he said, had brought the breaker bar and had brutally beaten each member of the family. Dylan, in particular, had been targeted with 52 strikes. The brutality of the attack was unimaginable. But Jason, despite his involvement, had remained silent for too long. Now, in exchange for a reduced sentence, he told the police everything. The most horrifying detail came from a cellmate of Chris Harris, who later revealed chilling information about Chris's mindset after the murders. According to the cellmate, Chris had confided that he felt no remorse for the killings. In fact, he said his only regret was not burning down the house to destroy the evidence. This comment sent a chill through everyone who heard it. It painted a picture of a man who not only killed his family but also felt no guilt. He didn't fear getting caught. He only wished he had done more to cover up his crime. Meanwhile, the small town of Beeson, Illinois, was rocked to its core. The G family had been well loved by the community. Rick and Ruth had been kind-hearted, hard-working people. Their children, Justina, Dylan, Austin, and little Tabitha, were all part of a family that had been a cornerstone of the town. To lose them in such a horrific way felt like a blow to everyone who knew them. People could hardly believe that the family they had admired for years had been torn apart by someone they had welcomed into their lives. The horror of the crime sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community. The question on everyone's mind was, how could this happen in a place like Beeson? How could a man with a family, someone who had once been a part of this community, commit such an unspeakable act? As the trial approached, emotions ran high. Chris Harris's sentencing came on July 19, 2013. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole for the 5 murders. The grief and anger were overwhelming for the surviving family members, especially Nicole, who had once defended her husband. The pain of realizing that Chris, the man she had loved, was responsible for her family's deaths was too much to bear. She had to accept the unthinkable. Chris wasn't the man she thought he was. Jason Harris, Chris's brother, was sentenced to 10 years in prison after his testimony helped convict Chris. His part in the killings, the way he failed to intervene or stop the violence, added another layer to the tragedy. The massacre of the G family will never be forgotten, but the mystery of why it happened remains a haunting echo in Beeson, Illinois. As the dust settles, one question remains. What truly drove Chris Harris to slaughter his own family in cold blood? Was it jealousy, rage, or something darker lurking beneath the surface? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories that will leave you questioning everything.